Lionel, is that you?
There, I think I got it. Hey kids, know what day it is? It's Canada Day. That's right, all over Canada today is our national birthday. Today's the day. It's like July 4th, only a lot further north. Officially, Canada Day started as Dominion Day in 1879, when the population of Canada was 7. Now, I think the population of Canada back then was probably, I'm going to take a shot in the dark and say 3 million. Then, in 1982, the government, which is always busy, work. You know those government guys, those politicians, work. In 1982, it was renamed Canada Day. So there you go. Today is Canada Day, and as Joe, our friend Boston Joe, is driving into work in his wagon, his Volkswagen GTI. No, it's TDI. It's a TDI wagon. It's a diesel, and it gets 87 miles to the gallon and does 0 to 60 in just under 5 minutes. It's a sweet ride. It's a chick magnet. Joe is beating the babes off with a stick. So this is episode number, don't tell me, let me guess. Hang on. I know it. I know the answer to this question. Let me guess. I can find it. Don't go away. I know the answer to this question. This is episode, I think it's 125, actually. This is episode number 125. I was right. It's episode 125. It's Blaine Hadfield of Arrowhead Models. It's an update with Blaine Hadfield about how Arrowhead Models is going and stuff in the industry and his new release. And it's a pretty good show. And I'm sure everybody will enjoy it. And I just wanted to come on first and wish everybody in the AML Nation Happy Canada Day. As a matter of fact, in Busted Knuckle, Kentucky, we have special celebrations for Canada Day, right there in front of the Stuart L. Sterling building, not far from the corners of Clark and Kent Streets. That's it. Subway chime. Go!
Did you put the big wind-up key in the side?
I put the big wind-up key in the side, Bruce.
Perfect.
So now can you start pedaling faster so we can get more power?
Oh, I thought that's what the wind-up key was for.
Oh yeah, but that unlocks. Oh,
I thought it was like a clockwork thing, you know.
Yeah.
And you wind it up,
Until you hear that whirring sound, it's not really working.
Yes. Okay. Well, let me get going.
Yeah.
How's that? How's that?
Yeah, you got to try to maintain. We have a speedometer there, so yeah.
Oh no.
Yeah. Try to maintain 12 miles an hour throughout the entire show.
Okay. Have you dialed 9 and 1 and just hit
just in case?
Just in case.
All right. So you know what, Bruce? Remember a long time ago, many months ago now. Let me just see how. I think this is probably I'm guessing right now. This is sometime around June.
All right.
That's why it's so lovely out there, and the birds are tweeting, and the grass is green.
Indeedly.
And we did, our old pal Blaine Hadfield, we did a live video stream.
Yes, we did.
It was wildly popular.
Wildly popular, as they all are.
And Blaine owns Arrowhead Models, and he's always fun to talk to because he's kind of philosophical.
Yes.
And he has his finger on the pulse of the hobby, so I thought we would check in with him again.
Yeah, and if I recall from the video conference, he's kind of cagey on letting people know what's going on.
Yeah, I thought tonight we would just we'll tape
try to uncage him.
Yeah, we'll tape him right to the chair and just we'll try some sort of
shine a bright light in his eye and all that stuff.
Yeah, you know what we'll do is we'll get one of those old shiny Athearn boxes.
Oh yeah.
And we'll shine the light on the Athearn box, and then the light will increase in strength by 20%.
Perfect.
And shine it directly into his eye, and Athearn.
Blue box Athearn. Unless we go way back and get some of the orange and white boxes.
I don't even remember those.
Oh, the metal side ones from the 50s.
Metal-sided boxes?
No, metal-sided cars that used to make.
I vaguely remember the cars. I just don't really remember the boxes.
Yeah.
I wonder why they changed from orange and blue. That's kind of a snazzy combo.
Well, you have to ask Irv Athearn what the thought process was.
You know what in the broadcasting business, you know what they call that where neither one of us was talking there for a second?
Dead air.
Dead air.
That's where you can slip the crickets in for a bit.
Yeah. That's the only broadcasting term I know is dead air because we're so good at that.
That's not to be confused with deadheads or fans of the Grateful Dead.
Yeah, exactly. All right, Blaine, come on in here to the studio.
Lionel, how's it going?
Oh, did you get a new microphone?
I may have.
So
I may have.
Okay, so we'll let everybody in know. I think it might be because he's under so much pressure. So I had sent him one of our special AML microphones.
Oh, they're sweet.
And then when we got him, when he arrived, I said, "Where's your microphone?" And he says, "I'm sending it back." And I said, "What for?" And he said, "Well, it's yours." And I went, "No, it's yours. I bought it. This is from AML headquarters in Busted Knuckle, Kentucky."
Yes, never looked a gift mic in the mouth.
Yeah. This will, you know what? This will improve your business by 20% because now when you're talking to your guys in China, you'll be even more clear and they'll go, "Oh, yes, Mr. Hadfield."
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So
sure.
Is that how you converse with them? Do you converse with them by talking or is it strictly email?
It's almost always email.
That must get hard, after a while.
Yeah, I mean, I know that some other people do FaceTime from time to time.
Yeah.
And as you know, the Chinese culture favors face-to-face meetings. So, that happens periodically. But yeah, the lion's share of communication is just by email. I like email because there's a track record for what's been discussed. But yeah.
And so how often would you must be hundreds and hundreds of emails for every individual project.
Yeah, easily. Yeah.
So I was talking to Lee English of Bowser, and he was very cagey too. And he told me about. This is what I'm fascinated about. I want you to help me with this, and I don't think this will involve you giving any of your trade secrets out at all, because we're going to also get involved in talking about how you were telling us about, one piece goes wrong and things go horribly awry. So I'm fascinated by, and Lee English was talking about this, that there were so many companies in the Affa factory, like 20, 30, 40 companies were in the Affa factory, that when they closed, there was so much, everybody was paranoid about what was going to happen next. And yet you found somebody, Lee English's Bowser has found somebody. It seems like there was a whole bunch of factories ready to go without a whole lot of really difficulty finding them.
Yeah, I mean, I can't speak to the methods that other people used. One of the things that may have facilitated that is leading up to Affa's closure, and this will probably not come as a surprise. The level of service started to decrease, and there was even a brief period prior to Affa's closure where the company was actually shut down by the government for EPA reasons for approximately a month. And those things weren't communicated, readily communicated. It's not like an email announcement went out that said, "Hey, we've got some environmental issues that we need to address." Point being is, it may have been the case that some customers were dissatisfied with Affa. I know for a fact that there were some individuals that were already looking for potentially some alternatives. So that may have greased the wheels in some sense. But in terms of how people went about finding a new manufacturer and how that came about quickly, there were a lot of conversations between manufacturers,
Right.
where manufacturers were actively sharing information and an open communication in the event that nobody would be caught out by that too far, including a secret meeting in Kansas City. I say secret in quotation marks is more or less a joke, but all of the manufacturers got together at the Kansas City National Train Show, and we had I don't know, something, an hour and a half long meeting. Everybody shared information openly, shared phone numbers. I mean, there was definitely a coming together for people to try to resolve these issues, and that may have helped facilitated that as well.
So the industry was working together as much as it could then.
Very much so. Yeah. In fact, probably to an alarming degree.
Okay.
So, it's the, I think there are a number of people in the industry that feel as I do, which is, a rising tide raises all ships. If we're doing well, if we're putting out good product, if customers collectively are happy about the health and state of the industry, it's better for everybody.
Yeah. And I guess what I'm not concerned, curious about is it seems so improbable that these products can be produced in the United States because of cost, and yet it wasn't hard to find other factories that were like ready to go almost, and this was no problem of doing these high end cars and locomotives. It was like, like I say, Lee English described this place that's way out in the country that he found, and it's like it doesn't seem to be. The technology doesn't seem to be very difficult for the Chinese to like, yeah, oh sure, we'll do it, or this guy will do it, or that guy will do it.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, I think some of that certainly had to do with the fact that manufacturers, for the most part, were talking, and the first phone call I received when Affa closed its doors was from David Lelbach at Tangent.
Right.
Called me up on my cell phone. Blaine, what's going on? What do you know? What, and likewise, it was the same for me. He and I met at Kansas City for a breakfast that we had prior to the show, discussed our options, discussed, what are the best strategies for us to get through this. So, I called Exact Rail. I knew the tooling well, so I reached out to John Pastana, the owner of Exact Rail, and then I called others at the company, asked if there was anything that I could do to help. And Intermountain called me, and Gene Fusco and I were in, there was a lot of conversation there. So there was information. Who are you talking to? Where
Right.
are there opportunities? That's it's not a big industry. There's just not that many players, and so information in that way spreads pretty quickly. Now we've all ended up going different places, and I don't know at this point, to the degree that I used to, where everybody has landed.
Right.
But that's not to say that people weren't readily concerned and felt like it was in our collective interest to buoy everyone up.
So does it surprise you that there are so many physical locations that could take this work? Like, that seemed to be what I took to be the first problem, was they weren't even sure if they could find other factories that could do this work. And yet, just a few months later, like 7 months later, it seems like there's many places in China that were very capable of doing this work.
Well, to be honest, I think the jury's still out on that. We have yet to see a lot of product from some of these new manufacturing partners. So we'll see. As for the other part, I'm not terribly surprised. Most of the manufacturers tapped the other known players. They went to the familiar names and places that we knew existed prior. It's not like, I would say, in only just a small handful of circumstances was it the case that people actually found new people, like they actually uncovered somebody. That was the case for Lee English. That was the case for myself, as I mentioned in our live stream.
Right.
But I don't think that was the case for very many people. I think they went to those known entities with whom they had already had relations. I, as a normal course, when I go to China, I don't just visit our manufacturing partner. I visit manufacturers with whom I know, and I keep those relationships warm as just a matter of course. So, the other people do the same. And so it's not a stretch to think that some people had already lined this up. And like I said, I don't mean to reiterate for fear of boring your listeners, but I think there was some contempt, a lot of missed deadlines out of Affa leading up to their closure. All of the hallmark signs that there were issues were conspicuous. And I know, as a matter of fact, that there were manufacturers that were looking around and thinking, look, we've got a fire in the building and we've got to come up with some alternatives. That's not to say that anybody anticipated the doors closing, but there was some dissatisfaction there. So
right, and the biggest thing. So are the machines? Are they? I'm assuming the machines that produce handrails are the same machines that could produce parts for, tanks and any other kind of plastic model. So I guess plastic injection molding machines are not uncommon in the industry for manufacturers to find, I guess.
Potentially no, actually. So typically there are a couple of variables in the injection molding press itself, and those include the size of the press, like the physical dimensions of the press, and then the tonnage of the press. So it's typically what model train manufacturers are going for is, a little bit smaller press because the parts aren't that big. And they often run them at high tonnages and high pressures. But the point is no, some of that is definitely at stake, right?
Right.
And then another component, and this is common to all injection molding, is you have what's called a mud base, which is a steel unit into which your molds go, but that clamps to the injection molding press.
Yeah.
and that's kind of think of that as a intermediate unit, and that can very much be proprietary. It's not, it doesn't have to be, but that's a much more difficult match. Now, those can be created. I mean, they're machined, steel components. So no, there's some retooling. But anybody who's working in the model train industry, who's doing these kinds of things, is probably well enough equipped to deal with that it doesn't itself turn into extended deadlines. I mean, already people are getting some things out of China using other partners, but
right.
I think to say that it was surprisingly easy might overstate.
Yeah, I guess the part of the problem is, and it's kind of unique for me, is like, for the people outside of the industry, that the people that want all the rivets in the right place, it seems a little mysterious how this all happens, but yet the people that are inside the industry, the manufacturers, seem to fully understand.
Yeah.
But, so on the one hand of the aisle, you've got all these people going, "Oh my God, we're never going to see another, locomotive or hopper car again." And there was some definite distress on the part of the manufacturers, which seems to have pretty quickly dissipated.
Yeah.
Yeah. One of the things you mentioned with the video interview we did, that you were lucky enough to be able to get your tooling out before the factory closed. I've heard that some other manufacturers were not so lucky and had some difficulties retaining their tooling. Did everybody eventually get their tooling back, or did some have to start from scratch?
So I'm not going to say very much about this because I could, I might say some things that aren't. There were a lot of reasons why some people did and some people didn't get their tooling out, and they all didn't just relate to the fact of the doors closing, right? And that tooling is therefore accessible or not accessible. There were some companies that had fallen behind on their bills, and I'm not saying that that's the case,
right?
For all companies that maybe struggled to get their tooling out, but the company Affa wasn't going to release tooling to companies where there was an outstanding debt, a significant outstanding debt. And
which makes sense.
So some people may have struggled with that. And then, but the way things closed down facilitated, well, the way this came about was pretty challenging for manufacturers, and it definitely evoked fear because the company closed. Like, it closed without notice, right? That was the first message that manufacturers got. And what really happened, and it took time for this to even rise to the level of our own awareness, was that the owner of the factory stepped away, and his second in charge continued to operate the company and help facilitate the exchange of tooling and to finish up projects that were close. So the owner, when the factory closed, went off the radar, was not accessible to most people immediately. And he was the point of contact for most of us. So what we were dealing with on our end was the factory is closed. Our main point of contact is
gone.
Gone. And it was only in time and that we ourselves got a clear picture of what was actually happening. It was a very, very confusing moment.
Did somebody go over? Did anybody go over that you know of, or?
Oh yeah. I think pretty much every manufacturer. I mean, there were a lot of manufacturers doing business there, and I'm not keeping tabs on what all of them are doing.
Well, sure, yeah.
But pretty much everyone that I know of went over there.
Oh, okay, cool. All right, so that's enough. We beat that to death. We were talking kind of interesting there a few months ago. We got onto a discussion about what all's involved, and there's I think you said there's 192 parts in the committee hopper.
Well, there's 145 parts.
Oh yeah, 145
on the Pennsylvania version of the committee design hopper, and 141 parts on the Denver and Rio Grande version. And of the tooled parts, there are almost no parts in common between those two cars. So effectively, we produced a car with 286 parts. Now, 286 parts aren't on any one car, but
varies.
That's the scope. Yeah, the scope and the breadth of the project was that big. It was really a huge project.
And does each part have its own mold then?
Well, yes, all plastic parts have their own mold.
Okay.
Well, let me back up, because that might be a little misleading. Every plastic part comes from a mold. There are some molds that have multiple cavities.
Right.
And from those cavities, a unique part may be produced. So it's possible that you have a mold that might have, 10 cavities in it.
Right.
And that one mold would produce 10 parts.
Okay. And so you were talking about, the car gets to a certain point and, the 103rd part doesn't fit properly, or something happens, and basically that car's a wash. Is that kind of what you were saying?
Well, yeah. So, it's not the case that there's a one-to-one correspondence between somebody not landing a part right and the entire car being scrapped. But yeah, the production process in our standards in particular are such that, if you make a mistake, either that needs to be fixed, right? So if there's a subcomponent, a subassembly that, when put together, then inserts into the major assembly, right, the major car, then it might be the case that you're not scrapping a whole car, but you have to redo that subassembly.
Right.
Or sometimes with some kinds of assemblies, yeah, if you get it wrong, you'd have to scrap that whole car. If there's a pad printing or a painting error,
yeah,
and if that's coming late in the production sequence, yeah, that everything gets scrapped.
How often would a whole car get scrapped? Obviously they have how many? This is a better question. How many people do you think touch a car, the committee design car? How many people would touch it from start to finish?
I don't know exactly what that would be.
No, roughly.
Yeah, but there might be 250 to 300 touch points potentially.
Right. And would one person be in charge of putting on all the handrails, and another person would be, or would, these people are basically model builders for all intents and purposes.
Yeah, they are. Typically the way it works, it's a kind of assembly line where one person does one task, which is the way we want it for our business, because there's a lot of reasons for why you want that way that relate to QA QC protocol, but
What's
So
what's QA and QC?
quality assurance, quality control.
Okay.
If you've got a quality control issue and there's one person doing one task, then it's easy to figure out where the problem is, on whose head, right?
Right.
Problem resides. And it's very easy to address it. When you have people doing multiple assembly tasks, then it becomes a little bit more ambiguous.
Yeah.
But typically, yeah, the way it happens is one person does one task, the car is presented, they complete the task, and it moves down the assembly line. And then at intervals along the way, there's a person that's doing quality control.
Jeez.
How long does it take the workers to train up to do these?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what the answer is to that. That's not real. I mean, I'm not asking our partners those kinds of questions. I'm very interested in the quality of our product and how it arrives to us, but the time that they take to train their people or how they organize that on their end is less visible. I'm sure if I asked them, they would tell me they wouldn't have a problem. It's just
Sure. Did you not tell them you were going to be on a podcast? Or better yet, did you not tell them you're going to be on a Modeler's Life podcast?
Right.
Exactly. All right. So how much? So you got to figure in wastage, I guess. How much is it? Like 10% wastage, 20%, 5%?
It depends. It depends on the car, and it depends on the complexity of the car. It depends on the complexity of the finish work. Scrap rates can vary significantly. And
right.
One of the I'm starting to recall the conversation that we had that gave rise to this. I believe we were at the Amherst Train Show.
I believe we were.
And yeah. And, we're two fellers. We're sitting at the Arrowhead booth, you and I.
Yep.
And I can't remember the question that you asked me, but if I recall, it related to what is the one thing that you would want to communicate, or
yes.
Am I remembering this right?
Yep, pretty much, yeah.
Okay. And I said to you, the one thing that I felt like if I had the ability to communicate and make customers generally understand is that the relationship between simple cars, right, cars of relatively few pieces, and the relationship between complex cars is in no way, shape, or form linear. The costs associated with producing a simple car look very, very different from the costs associated with a complex car due to these reasons that we're talking about. Due to the idea that if I have a car that consists of 5 parts and I misassemble something, it's not a huge loss insofar as a person very quickly can recoup those, right? And not to mention that you're less prone to make a mistake because the assembly of the car itself is simple. But in a complex car, like our committee design hopper, every time a person touches the car, there's a probability that a mistake is going to be made. And if you've got 145 parts and 300 touch points on that car, right, your scrap rates are significantly higher. And scrap rate is something that we cover as just a part of our manufacturing cost. I mean, that's just baked in.
Yeah.
It's manufacturing time. It's right. And so there are some people that may be inclined to believe that if you have a simple car that sells for $35 or $30, which, by the way, is about what a more simple car sells for in the contemporary market, and you have an exceedingly complex car with 145 parts per car, that the difference between the two is all margin, right? Like the expensive car is, the manufacturers that are making the expensive car are making a lot of money on a per car basis. But in reality, I would argue that the opposite is true, that the margins on a complex car are really thin and the margins on a simple car are really broad.
Yeah, and that's, I think, goes with a lot of things, that the more complex you have to consider what price point you can sell that for. And like you say, it's just somebody going to pay $90 or something, or they're more likely to pay, say, 60. And then if you've realized the market can support 60, then you've got to work your product to that. And you could be making certainly less on that than a simple one.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. Well, let's move along. I'm looking on your page here, and I saw Neil Schofield did a beautiful Conrail version of the car.
Yeah. So, Neil did a great job with that. I don't know if you've had a chance to get to know him or see his layout, but he has absolutely a stunning layout. He models the Canadian Pacific in New England, and has just done some beautiful work. In fact, he sent me an email just a short period ago, maybe 3 days ago, apprising me of some updates he's done on his layout. He installed a new bridge section, and just stunning work. One of those just paradigm layouts, just an inspiring layout. And he purchased some of our cars.
Some of the you have undecorated, don't you?
We do have undecks. Yep.
Yeah, and he purchased those.
Well, in this case, he actually didn't purchase the undecks. He bought some painted models and then stripped them and repainted them.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So some people have chosen to go that route. Obviously, it's a lot of work to put together, one of the kits. It's in the words of Brian Bana, who's another esteemed prototype modeler. He claims it's the only scale model kit in the business for freight cars. Now, I think that's an awfully generous compliment, and one that we appreciate. But it's a lot of work to put together one of those kits. And if anybody wants to know or assess for themselves the value that they're getting in a model, put together one of the kits. The Arrowhead models that you buy are the kits are assembled and go together in precisely the same way that are finished models. There's somebody behind the scenes that is literally taking the kit and putting the kit together and then shipping it to us. There are no differences.
Right.
So, if I were to put together one of our kits, it would probably, given the way I work, so
you work
couple hours every weekend or every night. It would probably take me a week to get it together.
Wow. And didn't you say, weren't you telling me you wrote 35 pages of instructions? Yeah,
so they're not published yet.
Oh, okay.
But no, you're right. We have instructions. I think it ended up being 39. I'd have to look.
Wow.
But yeah, our instructions are 39 pages long. And what I've done, instructions are tricky because, they're just tricky for a lot of reasons. If anyone has attempted to write instructions, I write something and and believe that it's imminently clear, and I pass that off to someone else, and it doesn't make sense. And so as a part of our process for creating instructions, I sent it out to a number of people who have already purchased the kits and asked for feedback, and I've gotten some. I think the deadline that we established for that was the 6th. I think that's Thursday.
The 6th of March?
Yeah, the 6th of March.
Yeah, that's probably passed like by 4 months now.
Yeah, it probably is. Well, just the same, I've asked for feedback on all of that, and then we'll take whatever feedback we get into account and make, whatever changes are necessary, and then we'll publish it. But yeah, 39.
Wow.
39 pages. It took me almost a week, like a week solid, to create those instructions.
Do you think that will deter you from detour you from Bruce? I'm not saying it right.
Deter
you from doing more undecorated cars?
No, it won't. I won't make the decision about that. But some people do ask why are undecorated cars the same price as regular cars or close there too. They're not precisely the same for Arrowhead, but they're close there too. And the reason is that it takes us a great deal of time to put instructions together. As I said, like I lost an entire week to do that. And by and large, we aren't guaranteed to sell that many. Undecorated kits, I'll tell you, I just have not been able to make sense of it. And I know I'm not the only one, because I've had this conversation with other manufacturers. Like, you'll have a kit that will sell reasonably well. And when I say reasonably well, I mean you'll sell a couple hundred kits, not a couple thousand, right?
Right.
And then you'll put out another kit, which by all intents and purposes should do equally as well. Maybe it's the same car type, it's the same era, something else you've done, right?
Right.
And you can barely sell it at all.
Right.
And there just doesn't seem to be a lot of rhyme or reason to it. And so when you take into account the low quantities that you sell, when you take into account the fact that, if I'm spending a week doing kit instructions, I'm not spending a week doing other kinds of development. And when you take into account the volumes, the median volumes that you'll sell by doing kits, they're a lot of work. They're a lot of work for a manufacturer too. And we offer them not because it's a profit center for the company. We offer them because there are people out there that love kits. And it's my obligation, I feel like, to support those people. And, I took a week to do the instructions, not because it wasn't possible to do the instructions in a day. I could have thrown some instructions together in a day, I'm sure. But because I feel like if we're going to do anything, damn it, we're going to do it well,
Right. Yeah, I know. That's kind of been your mantra from the beginning.
Yeah. Yeah. So, hopefully customers are happy with them. The feedback I've gotten so far has been good, and hopefully it will, inspire some people to buy some more undecorated kits.
And okay, go ahead.
Go on. Go on.
So now my next thing I want to cover, because you and I we're long-winded. We're long-winded. We are.
Am I?
No, we are.
Okay.
As a combo, we're long-winded. So I'm interested now in your opinion of, because we've had this discussion 100 times, but never with this equation thrown in. You've gotten your cars. It's been very successful. Every time I ask you, you're very pleased with the way the cars are selling.
Mm-hmm.
Has your opinion of where the hobby is in terms of growing, not growing, changed with the success of your business?
Well, we've had this or similar conversations, like you said, not with that same variable in the equation, a couple of times now. So to bring your listeners up to speed, my position has been, I think there are segments of the hobby that are growing, and there are segments of the hobby that are getting smaller. Where I think the hobby is getting smaller is in sort of the colloquial, I'm sorry, I misspoke, like the more pedestrian, like, hey, let's get our kid a train set to put under the,
Right.
in the basement. I think there was a time when, if you were to poll young people, probably most people at one point in their life had a model train layout 50 years ago, 60 years ago, where today that number is going to be smaller. Where I think the hobby is growing significantly is in the prototype markets, which is not to say that the lower end or the value markets aren't strong. There's, I spoke to a couple of dealers. Arrowhead has a growing dealer network, and from time to time I try to reach out and speak to them, even between when they're placing orders from us,
Right.
and just be familiar with their world and have their perspective. And there are some hobby stores that move a lot of high-end product, and there are some hobby stores that move a lot of low-end product. And
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, one thing that it's a fascinating subject that I'm not sure we will be able to figure out the answer to for several years, possibly decades. Because one thing that's I'm fascinated about, and I talked about it on a Shane show a few months ago, is that there's a fella, Midwest Modelers, Midwest Model Railroad, I believe it's called, and it's run by a fellow named Stephen Atwell and his dad. And they started out basically in the basement because they couldn't get end scale parts. And now they've gone from just having a mail order business to they have a brick and mortar location.
Oh, really?
Which is almost unheard of when you think about it.
Yeah. So about that, what I see, so recently the hobby has passed through a transitional state where, 40 years ago, there were brick and mortar hobby stores in every town, right?
Right.
Now there aren't. A lot of them have been replaced by internet dealers. And that, I think, has given some people the perception that the hobby is dying and that, all of these dealers are going out of business. The truth of the matter is that the change that we just passed through is in effect for all industries.
Yes.
All industries have dealt with that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And there have been a fair number of new dealers come into the market since that shift. And those dealers that I know are doing really, really well.
Yeah.
I mean, that's something to lend credibility to the idea that the hobby is vibrant and strong. And for what it's worth, I think it is. I think no one ever need apologize for being a model railroader. I think it's really one of the greatest hobbies. And I've used the term sophisticated to describe it in maybe past podcasts and in some blogs that I've written. But I really do think it's a sophisticated hobby. It requires, to pull off a successful model railroad empire requires a breadth and diversity of talents and strengths and and knowledge that goes way beyond any other hobby of which I'm aware.
Yeah, I guess why I find it fascinating to talk to you because of our history, and now I happen to have stumbled on to, we made acquaintance just before you started Arrowhead Models, and I mean, you can't. For me, I would say to you, I don't know what you're talking about because I know you. I know this guy that was with it, just started a model railroad manufacturing company, and he's telling me his sales are great. So for all of you folks that are telling me this is a disaster, looking for a place to land, this guy is, just started a company and he's thrilled with the way his first car is being sold. And it's like, so if it's dying,
Well, if you're looking for a vote of confidence from me, I leveraged my entire life to start this company.
Right.
And I would not have done that if I didn't have absolute confidence in the industry.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the problem is we're just, like, I had this thought too. Again, it was several months ago I said it, and I've probably said it several times since. But I was talking to our Shane, the young gun. He's 22 years old, and he just moved into an apartment, and he's been on the show quite a bit. And we were talking about, okay, now he's got a dedicated room for his model railroading, and he's going to build along one wall, probably like a 2-foot by 12-foot sectional layout. He's an N scaler. But I think one of the things that's different now that's really going to be hard for people to understand is that I said to him, because he's very much into the DCC and all the things you can make locomotives do, and he was putting a decoder in a Atlas articulated car carrier, so it would make sounds and stuff. And the difference before was if you wanted to have a situation where you could interact with model railroaders in your home, you probably had to build a fair size layout, and you'd have 5 or 6 or 7 guys over to operate, or some people would have 10 or 12. And that's where you would get a lot of your interaction from, as these guys would come over once a month and spend an evening with you. And now you can have a 2-foot by 12-foot layout, do it really well, have really cool locomotives and highly detailed cars. And all you got to do then to be able to show and have people enjoy it with you is turn on your computer. And there's a whole world of people that can enjoy it with you.
Yeah. And
there's also to go along on, you can, there's guys who are setting up operating sessions with people not even in the room doing things like dispatching layout, things like that the internet made possible.
Yeah, like I just had this thought, and I'm going to insult somebody.
Okay.
I don't know who it is I'm insulting, and I apologize if you take this the wrong way. But if you're somebody that's not going to be a model railroader anymore because you're going to play video games, I don't think you're ever probably going to be a model railroader anyways.
Yeah, right? Like this is a hobby of doers. Like, if you're not somebody that can get up and chop some wood, you'll never have a model railroad. And that it's just such a beautiful hobby in that way. And one thing that, to add to the point that you just expressed, Lionel, is you also see the emergence of segments in the hobby now. So when I was young, and I'm not that old, right?
Right.
But in the 1990s, like there weren't cliques of people. Maybe clique isn't the right word. There weren't groups of people that focused on weathering equipment.
Right.
Like people weathered equipment a little bit, but there wasn't a literal like segment of the hobby that was itself an emergent group of weathering aficionados. And by the way, when it comes to weathering, there is nothing that has changed between today and 1980. Like,
oh yeah, for sure.
I could have gotten a brush and some dull coat, and Bob Ross was on the TV, and I could have been weathering freight cars in 1980. But I'm not saying it never happened. I'm just not aware of it happening. And now it's a major segment of the industry, people who just weather freight cars. And the point there is that's not the result of some like disruptive technology that has created something. That's the organic result of people being in the hobby and doing something new and organic growth within the hobby, right? To create new segments. And you see that in a number of different places now that, I feel like where model railroading is really getting exciting is in 1950 and 1960, model railroading was pretty. Now, I don't want to offend anybody with this statement either, but it was pretty one-dimensional, right? Like you'd build a layout, you'd put the cork down, the skills that brought about that layout weren't one-dimensional in any sense, but how you would express this interest was pretty one-dimensional, Today, the way you express that is multifaceted. I mean, there are guys super detailing stuff, weathering. I mean, there's just emergent segments of the hobby, which is indicative of a healthy, vibrant industry and not indicative of one that's dying necessarily.
Yeah, exactly. I like what I think this podcast does is it's another example of what you just said. It's this podcast gives us the opportunity to talk to people in ways that were never afforded us up until 5 or 6 or 7 years ago, where you can talk to Blaine Hadfield, the owner of Arrowhead Models, and talk to him in depth. There was no place to have that happen. You wouldn't put it in Model Railroader. You wouldn't put the transcript of this interview in Model Railroader. It would take up 10 pages, and they'd be afraid.
Right.
They'd be afraid nobody'd read it.
Right.
And so we have that's a whole nother layer. Is that's probably one of the reasons the podcast is so popular. That, Bruce, and the fact that Mike Ostertag is on it, I guess.
I'm thinking.
Yeah.
He's probably the big. I'm thinking Spoon is the big draw.
Yeah, exactly. But it's so cool. And let's talk about RPM meets, because I know you're very excited about RPM meets. You really enjoy those. And that's another thing that's, to me, just blows me away. In the last 10 years, they've become wildly popular. And like, I know there's been the Chicago one for the last 25 years. But in the last 10, I think, like that St. Louis one has grown exponentially. Oh,
yeah. Yeah. And I think RPM meets might be the best evidence of the point that we're trying to make. You've got a new segment, an emerging segment, where there are now significant numbers of people that are really focused on prototype modeling. And they're not just modeling trains. Like, that's a part of it, of course. But I've been to a lot of prototype modeling meets where guys are bringing not freight cars or locomotives, but railroad related structures, And there are architectural modelers out there that have, railroad interests, and they're doing models of buildings and there's just, it's fascinating.
It is.
RPM meets, never been to one, and I'm curious. We always hear the hue and cry that particularly in MRA, the hobby's dying. There's no young people in it. Blah blah blah. What is the participation of younger people at RPM meets?
I would say the average age at the RPM meet is somewhere in the 40s.
Yeah, that sounds. Yeah.
Easily. Like, there's a lot of guys in their 30s at RPM meets. A lot of people. Like, I don't think we have any idea. I don't think we have any idea the impact of social media is going to have on this hobby and the connectivity that we all are able to share. And I think RPM meets, like, I think people get excited about RPM meets because they read about them on the internet. like here on your blog, you like, I know you have a local, or not local particularly, but you've attended. Let me see. Don't tell me. You were at the Bridgetown RPM meet. Is that the one that's near you?
So Bridgetown is in Portland, Oregon.
Okay.
I host an RPM meet.
Yes.
I host the Mountain States RPM meet, which draws people from the Intermountain area, both Denver and Salt Lake. We host that. It's in Wyoming, in a town called Evanston, and it's about an hour, 2 hours outside of Salt Lake City, going towards Denver. And
it's not that it's a small town, isn't it, Evanston?
Evanston is a small town, but it's on the UP Transcon, and we hold it in the historic railroad engine house, which has been beautifully restored. I'd venture that it's probably potentially the nicest facility in which a railroad meet is held in the country, or among the nicest meets. It's really, really a fantastic venue, and you can look outside the window, and the freight trains are rolling by. And
I want to know. I want to know the secret of this hobby and the fascination of trains, because, like like Evanston is not a big town. Like, what is it, 10,000 people or something?
Yeah, I have no idea what it is, but something probably close to that.
Yeah, roughly. And I mean, it has like you say, you've just described a fantastic historical railroad facility. And I mean, Greeley, Colorado has a fantastic train museum, and there's a guy in Cottonwood in Arizona that's building a fantastic layout. Like, there's something that we're missing. There's something we're missing, and something somehow in an underlying, below the surface of model railroading, because it just seems like there's more and more things of train-related stuff that is more spectacular. Like, I think that's going to be part of what makes it grow, is how spectacular things are becoming.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's that guy, Bruce, we stumbled across in Ohio.
Yes.
That's built a roundhouse just 7 years ago.
Yep.
A full-size roundhouse that houses many steam locomotives, and
it's got like 28 different locomotives or so in there. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
some functional, some not yet, but
yeah. Like, I just think the hobby. There's something about this that, in general, we're missing. It's like, again, I could easily go back, just off the top of my head, if we didn't. I'm sure there's others, but scaled trains and Arrowhead models, they've only started in the last few years, and seem to be flourishing without really any problem. And I would go, as we've had this discussion, I really don't believe, and I don't think I've ever said this on the podcast before, and now, of course, it'll be something else I beat to death. But but I don't really believe that video games draw people away from the hobby, because I don't think those people would really have ever been in the hobby that much anyways.
Yeah, but then there's that whole subset that are into train simulators and that type of thing.
Yeah.
So somewhere there's a love of trains there. And look at Shane the Young Gun. He plays that Run 8 or whatever simulator.
Yeah.
And I think he's got Peter Borchards into it as well. So there's things out there that guys are into. And you look at some of the others, like Train Simulator or Trains, the other ones, that where some guys will spend hours modeling rolling stock and modeling scenery and that thing. So they're basically virtual model railroading on the computer rather than physically with the 3D models and that type of thing. So, just to say they're not interested is maybe a bit out, because there's certainly a lot of video type people out there enjoying a hobby.
Yeah, I think that potentially the biggest draw for this hobby is that you can choose to participate for a myriad of different reasons that that absolutely don't look anything like why your neighbor or friend participates. Like, I just don't know of other hobbies that have that much to offer. There are people that, are model railroaders who are really into it for the history.
Yeah.
They love the history, and in fact, the whole Arrowhead brand is crafted to pay homage to that in one way. The fact that railroads are deeply entrenched in our history and conceptions of what is America and what is Americana. And, I know guys that love DCC and that's kind of it. You know what I mean? And they love it and they're into the hobby because of it, where, someone else might have no interest in that. When I was young, my dad was into RC airplanes. And, they had a pretty active group in the area. I grew up in the Orem Provo area of Utah, and his group, the Utah Valley Aero Modelers, built a really impressive landing strip out in a town called Lehigh, Saratoga Springs. And he would take me out there every week to fly planes with them. For years, I would follow him out there. And I would go because he was my dad and I love spending time with my dad, but I had no interest in planes, right? And as I look back and consider that hobby, and I'm not trying to throw stones at RC plane enthusiasts, because I'm sure there's a lot of satisfaction that one can derive from that. And I'm sure that I've got some pretty biased reasoning as I go into this, but relative to model trains, it feels pretty narrow. You build the plane and you fly it. And if you don't love flying planes, then I don't know that RC planes has a whole lot to offer, but that's entirely not the case. In fact, it's diametrically different in model railroading when, you can participate for 1,000 reasons and they all look very different.
Yeah, I think people generally have a love of the mystery and the romance of trains and railroading, and then you can bring it back to life. Like this picture that Neil Schofield did of this Conrail car. You could sit and stare at that for, a good couple hours because it's such a spectacular model and it so reproduces what seems to be real, and yet you can have some of those on your own 2-foot by 12-foot layout, and with a locomotive that runs so well and everything like that.
Yeah. So, as some of your listeners may be aware, I'm new to Wyoming. My wife and family and we moved out here to a town called Sheridan, and the place that we're living in is not the place where we hope to land long term here. So I'm not building a layout. I was building a layout in our previous home. I'm not building a layout in this home, but I very much plan to build a layout here in the near future when we hope to move.
Right.
But that doesn't keep me from being engaged in the hobby. I was stripping paint off some cars just the other day and redecaling some things and doing some weathering. Like, you don't even need a layout.
Yeah, exactly.
To be moving forward.
Yeah, you don't need a layout. Like, I can see me. Like, Bruce and I were hooking up JMRI on my iMac, and we had fun doing that and getting it all going. And then the decoders and the 2 locomotives we were using, my decoders are so old, we decided, what needs to be done is send a couple of locomotives away to our pal Kaylee Zhang and have her put in some fancy some fancy decoders, and we can play with them. And I can see me having fun doing that.
Oh yeah. Yeah, for sure.
So and there's lots of guys there's building models that don't have layouts. I'm one of them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and you've always been a spectacular modeler, Bruce.
Well, I'm all right.
Yeah, I was just trying to make you feel good. You are a spectacular modeler. What was I going to say? Something really good. Oh yeah. So so you have are you like everybody else? Is Arrowhead like a cottage industry for you, and or you have another job and blah blah blah?
No, I'm full time. I'm full time in Arrowhead Models. Arrowhead is me and my wife.
Right.
So if there's anything that gets done at Arrowhead, it's either her or me that did it. And we operate Arrowhead Models, out of our home.
Wow.
So we're definitely small. I mean, we are quintessentially the small business. But it's we're a brand new business launched in August, and I'm able to do it full time without a second income, and
That's pretty cool.
we're right on the path that we feel like we need to be to grow this, and
and it's going the way
yeah.
it's going at least as well as you'd hoped, and by the sounds of it, probably better than you would have hoped.
Sure. Yeah. I'm very fortunate. I absolutely love what I do. And, so long as I'm doing this and doing it well, and it's well received by our customers, I'm just as happy as I can be. And
Yeah, what is the goal for Arrowhead Models? We're talking one or maybe 2, 3 releases a year. How do you see this unfolding?
well, our I don't have my only goal with the business is 2 to 3 cars a year. If we're putting out 2 to 3 cars a year, and when I say 2 to 3 cars a year, I don't mean 2 to 3 releases. I mean, we're putting out 2 to 3 brand new, all new cars a year, then we'll be right in line with my expectations for the company, which, for me is I don't have ambitions to be the largest model train company, to be the most aggressive. I don't begrudge people that want to operate their businesses that way. We just want to put out, 3 great all new products every year, and and whatever that does for our business, or whatever it looks like for us to be, that is what I want to be. So pretty simple game plan there.
Yeah.
That
Yeah. It's just, yeah, it's going to be interesting to see you do that. What else, Bruce? What else? There's like a million questions. Oh yeah, so this interview will more than likely come out in June, probably the first or second interview in June. So by then, will we have do we think by now, as we're speaking right now, do you hope that another car has been released?
Well, I don't know to say, and I don't want to
Okay.
overhype our production schedule. Naturally, when I say we do 2 to 3 cars a year, Arrowhead has some growth ahead of it to be able to sustain that kind of schedule.
Sure.
We do have cars in production right now. I'm hoping that those will be available in the summer, but like I said, in our conversation at Amherst, we're working with a new vendor on that.
Yeah.
And so, I don't have a delivery timeline for the next project.
So
based on where we're at in the process, I would expect that to be sometime in the summer. I think that's reasonable, but we're we're far enough along that I'm expecting a delivery estimate from them probably tomorrow or the next day, believe it or not.
Wow. So that's cool.
And had we had this podcast 2 days from now, I'd probably have an answer for you on that. But as it is, I think that's probably reasonable, but I can't make any promises.
Well, you know what we'll do is in a couple of weeks, we'll get together for 5 or 10 minutes and we'll add that to the end of this podcast.
Sure.
That would be cool. And okay, so how about this for an idea, Bruce? Back me up on. See if you know what. Don't back me up on it if it's a bad idea.
I'll turn my mic on. Will that work better?
Yeah. Thanks. Back me up on this idea if you think it's a good one, but only if you think it's a good one.
All right.
We've inadvertently we started having an annual barbecue for the podcast.
Yes.
And I'm also telling Blaine this. You already know about the barbecue.
Yes.
So Blaine, inadvertently, in 2017, we had our first AML barbecue in Rochelle, Illinois, of course, at the Rochelle, Illinois Railroad Park. And we had one last year, and this will be our third year. And we're pretty excited because we have Andy Dorsch, who lives in Ripon, Wisconsin. He calls it Ripon because when he drives to work, he's ripping down the highway. And also Mike the Spoon Ostertag, who lives in Green Bay, Wisconsin, home of the frozen tundra of Lambeau Field. They're going to have a caboose build-off, so there'll be a popular vote contest. We're also very excited because we're going to have all the way from Great Britain, Peter Borchards, who will be doing a meet and greet from 1:30 to 2:30 p.m. With his fans. He'll be signing 8x10 glossies. Here's what I'm thinking. At 1 o'clock, before the meet and greet, you announce your next. That's when you release your new car to the public.
Well, let's keep that in our back pocket without knowing the actual delivery schedule. That's not something I can commit to.
Well, at the very least, if they come out, send me a couple and I'll have them there.
Perfect. Yeah.
Okay, it's like 2.5 months or 3 months or 10 weeks or how many? It'd be like 77 days or 81 days or 69 days or 70 days. And we're back. And because we wanted to talk about your next release, and we had mentioned in our first segment about how, you know, you're hoping to get the car, more details on the car. And so what's happened since our last chat?
Well, I've been super busy, super glad to be here. Thank you for having me on.
Okay.
No, we're still pushing forward with the projects. We have, worked through some challenges on our end that's made it so our delivery of the car isn't going to be quite what I anticipated in that podcast. I think the last time we talked, the conversation was that I was aiming for summer.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're definitely going to roll past that. Just due to the reasons of starting a new business and working with a new manufacturer, things slow down a little bit, or at least they did for us in this instance. So, but yeah.
Okay, so let me say this. I know you don't like to, and none of the manufacturers do. You don't want to tell everything that's behind the curtain. But can you give us an idea, because your first car was so popular and now you got stuck, something's happened because of that whole mishmash with Affa. Everybody's struggling here and there. So can you give us like a hint of what happened that kind of got you pushed back?
Yeah. I hit a, so the hang up has nothing to do with China or our partner in China.
Right.
Nor does it have to do with our like the product itself. Naturally, when you're running a new business, you're managing a lot of balls in the air.
Yep.
And in this case, I hit a hang up in the financial plan where, we had a particular avenue that we were pursuing with respect to the financial operation of the business. And when that option didn't pan out for us, I had to go in search of a different option.
Yeah, because people don't realize the amount of money that's. I think that's the hardest thing for the hobbyist to realize is the amount of money that's involved in something like this. Like, I mean, it seems like, you're at the table and you're selling a $49 freight car. How much does your hopper sell for? Your committee hopper?
$48.95.
Yeah, so you're selling a $48.95 freight car, and to the individual that buys 2 or 3 of them, it probably doesn't seem like that big of a deal. But from the manufacturer's end, it's a huge outlay of cash to get all those parts and pieces moving. It's like trying to get a large locomotive started with a 100-car train behind it.
Yeah, in some sense, yeah, very much so. It's a huge outlay of capital, and then you don't see a return on that capital for many, many months, just because the lead times associated with development and engineering and tooling. I mean, that process is,
massive. It's
a
massive.
long process. So you're making this gross outlay of capital, and there is no revenue that gets attached to that capital outlay for 12 months. And depending on who you're dealing with in your financial plan, that could work for them. That could or that couldn't. If it's a commercial, if you're looking for commercial money, or you've got an investor, or however you've structured your business, there are implications to that for sure.
Well, and it's like any car dealership. The longer you go, the easier it'll be to supply the capital, because we have a dealer here in town, a Chevy dealer, GM, General Motors dealer, and the guy's been in town forever and ever. And every car on his lot, and he has a big lot, he owns every car on his lot. But it's taken him a long time to get there. And I mean, that puts him in a very a positive situation, because he owns all the cars. But in this situation, I mean, you got to get to that point. Someday in the future, your cars that you have produced will be paying for the next car down the road.
Yeah, and one of the mistakes in having this conversation in a public format is for people who are less familiar with the financial operations of a business might read into my comments too much. The committee design hopper was super successful, but there's still a financial plan behind that gets implemented that's bigger and broader and I just had to chase option B, and it was just a setback of just a few months while that came together.
And I don't think that's, we don't need to dwell on that, but I think that's a really great advantage of having you here talk about it, is the fact that people don't realize, I mean, we're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars to produce a car.
Right.
And people don't realize the amount of outlay. They think, okay, it's an HO scale car and it probably costs you 30 or 40 grand to make, which is so far off the mark. And I don't expect you to say figures, because that's unfair to you. But I do know, talking to other manufacturers since I started the podcast, I was shocked at the financial outlay that's required to produce one freight car.
Yeah.
It's and when you've only got one to sell.
Yeah, and Arrowhead Models is probably what most people expect. I mean, I'm not rich. My family's not rich. I mean, I'm bootstrapping this.
You're bootstrapping it for now. You're getting started. You're no different than anybody starting a business that doesn't have a pocket full of cash.
Yeah.
You know,
And
go ahead.
yeah, and we're on the path. Like, we're definitely on the path.
And so are you pretty happy with the manufacturer you found in China?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
And that wasn't as hard as you thought, eh? Finding a new guy.
Yeah, we covered that.
Yeah, we covered it a little bit. And I want to get off the money because you were very nice and fair. And I think it's great the way you're being honest, because I think people will appreciate Arrowhead Models a lot more, knowing that, you know, nobody expects you to expose your financials, but it's obvious. The biggest point we got to make here is the outlay to produce one HO scale freight car is enormous.
Right.
It's enormous.
Right.
Well, and go ahead, you say something, and then I got a great question.
Yeah, and anyone familiar with the operations of a small business or a startup would recognize the challenges that are pretty much universal to anybody, you know?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
How do you fund this? How do you get this off the ground? How do you get the momentum going behind it? And like I said, we're well on the path, but I'm not going to blame our manufacturer for something that, you know, is a hang up that honestly, you know, it's us working our plan and making adjustments in real time and, you know, responding to, you know, to the conditions of a dynamic industry. And so we're working through that.
I think I have a great question. You can clarify whether it's on the scale of 1 to 10. I think this one's pretty far up the scale.
Okay.
How does the manufacturing industry in model railroading now differ from the way it was, say, 25 years ago from an expense standpoint? Like, it seems to me now it's more costly to produce the kind of quality models everybody expects than it would have been 25 or 30 or 40 years ago.
Oh, for sure. And the returns are significantly less. And the reason the returns are less is because 25 years ago, it was acceptable by most modeler standards to have FUBI or stand-in freight cars that weren't accurate. And today it's not. So your opportunity to generate revenues, you know, to sustain your business off a particular car are significantly more narrow, I should say, because, you know, in times past, you could choose a freight car and then you could strap onto it 24 additional paint schemes for cars that are, you know, parenthetically or, you know, in quotes, close enough.
Yeah.
And you really can't. I mean, the market is becoming more segmented.
Right.
You know, you've got a growing and core group of prototype modelers that won't accept that, and that's not what we want to do. But the reality is 25 and 30 and 40 years ago, you'd make an investment into a particular project. You know, you tool up a car, and oh my gosh, you could just run with that forever. And the business side of the industry has just gotten so much more complex as people drive towards greater accuracy
yeah, because you could try to cut corners on this particular car to save costs, and you'd get eaten alive.
Yeah.
Because you've established with the first car, this is the kind of quality you're going to produce. So you can't back down on that quality now. You've got to stay with it.
Right. And we've cut no corners on this car.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. Yeah.
So let me guess, it's a CN coil car from 1962.
It's a C&J, Central of New Jersey.
Yeah. Central New Jersey. Hey, Blaine, have you ever thought of making any of these Central of New Jersey box cars? I think they'd be a real hit.
They probably would.
Well, you just can't. But that is something. And now that would go to my argument about how I think the hobby's growing, and we argue about that because look at what you have to go through to produce a car, and yet when you produce a good car, the market's there.
Right. Yeah.
You know, like oh my goodness gracious, we've really hit on something about. I feel like, see, I think that was easily an 8. That's how much the hobby's changed in the last 25 or 30 years. And when did it become in vogue to manufacture in China? Because like pretty much anybody that's producing any kind of a quality product now is doing it in China. And when did that start? Would that have been like 30 years ago, 20 years ago?
Well, I think for the model train industry, it started in the 90s, but I haven't been in the industry. You know, I didn't come to the industry until 2009.
Right.
But yeah, it was in the 90s where you really started to see model train manufacturers go to China. And
have you seen a difference in the last 10 years even in producing cars?
What kind of difference? What do you mean?
Is the quality that you've got to produce gone up? Like are the rivet counters kind of slowly driving you crazy with the amount of detail you got to do since in the last 10 years, or has that pretty much stayed the same? Or you kind of wonder how much better can the models get?
Yeah, I think the market does expect more, but I think when the market gets more, it's because there are people that are really dedicated to delivering a better product. Like, you know, I go to the lengths that I go to because, you know, intrinsically, that's just what I want to do.
Yeah.
And I view with great disdain anyone that thinks that that some manufacturers are trying to hold back or I don't know. But you know, we work awfully hard to get some very, very minor details right, and there's no real financial incentive to do that. You know, I mean, well, let me explain what I mean. Like, the market they want better models and they want more detailed models. But if I spend half a day agonizing over a particular contour on a bell crank, there's really no way for me to communicate that to people, you know, without becoming really, really tedious.
Yeah.
And there's really no way for people to recognize that I spent, you know, 2 days trying to make sure that was right and redesigning it 3 times in CAD because I just wasn't happy with it. And that comes from within.
Yeah. I just want to produce a really quality product. You want your product to stand out there with the very, very front runners of the industry. And which is, I mean, your committee car was so successful. That's obviously the way to go. Yeah.
You know, and that's a car that's going to keep on giving for us. You know, there are still quite a few paint schemes that will need to be done. And speaking to the complexity of the industry, and, you know, I imagine that there was a time, you know, 40 years ago when it would have been acceptable to also do the Milwaukee Road paint scheme of that car and to also do the Chesapeake and Ohio paint scheme of that car without doing any tooling revisions. But for Arrowhead today, it's not.
Right. You're making accurate cars. If you're doing the Milwaukee Road, it's going to be the Milwaukee Road car.
Yeah. And as I mentioned in the the various sites where you can read about the committee car, that's 2 distinct cars that we've tooled to offer those 3 variations.
Yeah.
2 distinct sets of body molds. 3 distinct sets of well, there's various detail molds that you have to tool to account for all of the variation, but those are a car that people view as one car by and large from the point of view of manufacturing and production. It's 2 distinct cars, as if with the same costs and the same inputs that there would be if we did a boxcar and a tank car.
Yeah.
They're just 2 distinct sets of body molds and detail molds.
I think a Bangor and Arrowhead boxcar would be really popular. You can make 6,000 of those and they just fly right off the shelf.
Yeah. It's a snappy paint scheme.
Well, it's a great paint scheme. I mean, that's the thing. The railroading of the 60s, 70s, and 80s is unbelievably interesting.
Yeah.
And I mean, I interviewed a fellow last night, Tim Garland, who's a locomotive engineer for the Norfolk Southern, and he loves railroading. He loves model railroading. I will contend from now and forever, I think that the hobby's just going to absolutely explode because there's so many people now can connect each other. It's an interesting pastime all the time. You don't have to be always building a layout. You can be on your computer, conversing with people. And that's what really is what the hobby's about, is the people. All right, I've bugged you long enough. So when's your best guess when you think this next car will come out? And let's remind everybody that Arrowhead Models, your theory is you're not going to announce the car until people can actually purchase the car.
That's right. We're not making an announcement. You're asking me to speculate, and it's something that I prefer not to do.
Okay, don't then.
But it's definitely going to be this year.
Okay. Next week?
Maybe.
Okay. On Tuesday?
Yeah, I mean, it could happen. But the reason that we do that is because I feel like when we make it, I don't know, when we project like that, when we make even if it's an informal announcement and something changes in manufacturing or on our end that pushes that date, if the customer knows about it and is aware, it becomes the customer's problem because the customer's expectations have to shift, right? They're really looking forward to something and it's not going to happen. And so that's one of the ways that we work to protect the customer experience, right? Is because we announce something when we have it, we don't preload the process with risk for the customer, right?
Yeah.
They're not making a commitment or thinking that they're going to make a commitment or getting their hopes worked out only to be let down, right?
That's going to pay off in the future because there's countless stories of, and we won't mention any particular manufacturers, but I mean, such and such announced this. They've been announcing this for 3 years, and they've been announcing this for 2 years, and they announced this 4 years ago, and then they'll give you an update, and it's like, that gets really old really fast.
Yeah, it does. And that shouldn't be our customer's burden to bear, right?
No, exactly. So I feel pretty confident the car is going to be released next Thursday. And we can stop right there.
Okay, sounds good.
All right. Thanks, Blaine.
You bet. Take care.
See ya. Okay, so now we're coming back. Now we had Mr. Hadfield come into the studio again. He flew in at his own expense to Busted Knuckle, Kentucky, and we had
Which
him.
means Arrowhead Models must be doing quite well.
Yeah, because that's There's a connecting flight. We're hoping to actually get a runway in Busted Knuckle. Right now, you just land on the 2-lane out front. But
yes.
So he's been and he's made his announcement, and now we're going to give out our email address and everything. But at the end of the show, Blaine, we're going to say 6 out of 10. The modeler's life is considered marginally adequate by 6 out of 10. Actually, no, that's a different show, isn't it?
Last I checked, but yeah. What the hell?
This is an actual episode, so scratch whatever I said there, Blaine. It'll be
Okay.
It'll be a
this will be edited out, will it?
Oh yeah, it'll all be edited out. That's the way we operate here. We take out all the crappy stuff.
Yes. And then somebody say, "Have you ever listened to our podcast?" Yes.
Yeah. And then somebody else will say, "Why did you do that specifically? Did you have a good reason?"
Nah, not really.
Boy, oh boy, Blaine. When you become really successful, maybe you can spend some advertising dollars with us, and we can get like professional people in here. Wouldn't that be exciting?
No, it would be awful.
Okay.
Oh, now he's just trying to suck up.
Now he's just sucking up to us. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, go ahead, Bruce. Give out that email address.
Our email address, because I do like to get emails, being the moderately agitated mailboy. Our email address is modeler'slife, modelers with one L, modeler'slife@gmail.com.
Yes, and we have a website. If you go to modeler'slife.com, you'll find our website. It has gives you a listing of recent shows, probably back as far as 8 months. There's a page about the crew. There's pages about other stuff. And that's pretty much it.
Well, links to Libsyn and iTunes. And...
yeah, links to all the places you can download the podcast. And hopefully the website is even more interesting than it was when we recorded this.
Yes.
So you do know, Blaine, I think you're pretty confident that at the appropriate time, you have to say happy rails to you.
Yes.
All right.
I've been practicing.
Attaboy. How did that new microphone, that new headset work?
It's great. I love it.
All right. It's
Big improvement.
Yeah, it's basically a party gift, a parting gift.
Perfect.
It's your swag bag. All right, Blaine, get ready.
Okay.
Well, Blaine, as the sun slowly sets over the back 40 and we close the barn doors on another episode of A Modeler's Life, I guess there's nothing else left to do except for you to say,
happy rails to you.
While in Busted Knuckle, guests of A Modeler's Life podcast stay at the Casa del Sol Motor Court and Inn, where late-night dancing at the Rumba Room is a magical event to be experienced.
It's another Lincoln Homer.
Did I get it wrong?